In the UFC, we always get to see the best fighters in the world lock into a cage and put on performances of a lifetime. But lately, I feel like we haven't been getting to see the biggest fights possible in this sport. Today, I've conducted a list of 5 fights I believe need to happen in 2025 that are all high profile and that everybody is going to get excited about. Let's get into it. Number 5, Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. The fight that inspired me to make this video. Dricus Du Plessis, of course, went out and defeated Sean Strickland dominantly in the UFC 312 main event, and of course that posed the question as to who would be next for the champion. And unanimously, I think everybody believes it should be Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev's coming off of that insane submission versus Robert Whittaker in round 1 and has been the boogeyman of the middleweight division ever since he's gotten into the UFC. He's always been looked at as an insane talent that a lot of people always thought could be a UFC champion. And for good reason. I mean, the guy's an absolute monster. The problem is actually getting Khamzat into the octagon. He seems to be only averaging a fight a year, which is much different from his debut year in the UFC where he had 4 fights. Dana White has said that Khamzat is next for the middleweight title. The question is, when is this fight happening? Because we know it will. I hope eventually, maybe in the summer of 2025 or maybe later towards the end of the year, we can see this fight happen. I think this fight would be massive. I think Du Plessis has all the tools to defeat a Khamzat Chimaev, and I think that a fight like this could do massive numbers, especially if the UFC finally decided to go to Africa like they keep saying they want to. They have an African champion in Dricus Du Plessis. You put that fight in South Africa, Khamzat Chimaev, Dricus Du Plessis, that fight just sounds absolutely massive. This one seems like it's inevitable. The question is just when. Number 4, Colby Covington versus Ian Machado Gary. Now, the odds of this one happening is much less likely than the other fight I just mentioned, because Colby Covington and Ian Gary, they're on kind of 2 different trajectories in their career. Colby, of course, is coming off of that loss against Joaquin Buckley and looks a shell of his former self, and Ian Machado Gary just had a very impressive performance against the undefeated Shavkat Rakhmonov, where his stock grew a lot. Now, the main reason for this fight being put together would be because it's just honestly a massive fight because of the build-up. We know Colby Covington loves to run his mouth, and Ian Gary just happens to be the easiest target in the UFC for multiple reasons. And I think both of these guys could come together and have a massive fight. Ian Gary was calling for this fight a lot of times before we got that Shavkat Rakhmonov fight, and Colby seemed to be ducking him. He didn't want the fight and would completely turn it down. But now, this fight seems to make a lot more sense for Colby. But does it still make as much sense for Ian Gary? I would say no. I mean, listen, Ian's coming off the best performance of his career versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, and everybody kind of knows that he could be a potential future champion. Colby, he's not looking like he could be a champion at this point. His loss against Buckley, he looked slow, he looked old, he looked like he shouldn't have been there. And at this point, I'm not sure if the UFC sees a Colby and Ian fight the same way I do, in which I don't know if they think it's as big of business because they don't think Colby's the same star that he once was. But ultimately, I still think this fight makes sense. Ian Gary, yes, he lost a very close fight to Shavkat, but he still needs an opponent in the meantime to get closer to the title. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good or bad Colby Covington is, he's still one of the biggest names in the welterweight division, and a win over him will put you in the spotlight. This fight would be insane in the build-up. I'm not sure how the actual fight would be, but the build-up would be very entertaining and could mean very big business for the UFC. Number 3, Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira 2. Two of the most beloved fighters in the UFC, Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira, and these two actually fought many years ago, where Max Holloway picked up technically a TKO finish after Charles had a weird issue go on in his neck with his esophagus and was unable to continue fighting. But that fight left a lot of question marks, and at the time, many people didn't care about it because Charles wasn't as good as he is now. However, now with Max Holloway moving up to lightweight and holding the BMF title, it seems like a perfect fight to make. Charles has become a fan favorite in the UFC. He's one of the most exciting fighters on the roster, and a clash between him and Max Holloway for the BMF title just sounds absolutely perfect. It's a fight that I think a lot of people would love getting behind because they're two of the most entertaining dudes on the roster, and we kind of need to see what would actually happen if these two fought. I mean, the first time, like I mentioned, it was a bit questionable. Now, there's a little bit of backstory there and a little bit of interest from a lot of people, I think. Some people are saying Charles should be fighting for the title, and I could see a world where that makes sense, but ultimately, he's just beaten Michael Chandler. I don't really account that as a massive win or a fight that should be getting you back to the title. However, a win over a former champion like Max Holloway gets you back to that title shot, and you have this for the BMF belt. It just makes sense. Both of these guys should be fighting for that belt whenever they fight because they always put on entertaining fights. This one would get me super excited, and I just think it makes a ton of sense. I don't see why the UFC wouldn't try and make this. Number 2, Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this one, but obviously this fight was going to make it onto this list. I mean, this is easily the most anticipated fight in the UFC right now, and arguably the biggest fight you could put on. Tom Aspinall, he's been holding the interim title for pretty much 2 years now, and he's had to defend his interim title because Jon Jones will not fight him. There's an excuse every time. There's a reason as to why he can't fight him all the time. And he's just kind of been delaying this process for a while. We saw the Jon Jones-Stipe Miocic fight. That was as boring as everybody expected it to be, and everybody knew Jon Jones was going to win this fight. Tom Aspinall, he's the interim champion, and he proves so many more threats than Stipe would have against Jon. Tom is easily one of the toughest opponents Jon would have to fight in his career because of his age and because of the sheer strength and size that Tom possesses, which could be why Jon doesn't want this fight or doesn't feel like he needs this fight at this point in his career. And in a way, I understand where he's coming from. But if you were going to say that you are the GOAT of MMA and you pride yourself on being the best fighter of all time, you have to be ready to step in there with the best competition that's in front of you. And that's exactly what Tom Aspinall is. If Jon Jones decides to run off into the sunset and not fight Tom Aspinall, I think that leaves a bit of a stain on his legacy. We've heard Dana White talk about him multiple times. He says this fight is happening, which gives me a little bit of hope, but until I see an official announcement, I'm not going to get myself excited about this one. We've heard International Fight Week this summer. I really hope it happens, and if it doesn't happen this summer, I honestly don't think we're going to see it happen at all. Number 1, Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. Yeah, this is easily the biggest fight you could make in the UFC right now. Ilia Topuria's 2024 run was absolutely incredible, knocking out Alexander Volkanovski and knocking out Max Holloway. It's not something you see very often, defeating two guys that were at the top of their division for over 5 years. And Islam Makhachev, on the other hand, of course, what is there to say about Islam? The guy is the pound-for-pound #1 for a reason, and he's destroyed many fighters and made it look easy somewhat. But a guy like El Matador brings a whole bunch of other problems for Islam. Ilia is a great wrestler, and he has lightning in both of his hands. Easily the best boxer in the UFC, and since we've seen Merab stop a Dagestani fighter in Umar Nurmagomedov, I think it's given a lot of people hope to see if there's actually other guys out there that could deal with these Dagestani fighters, and I think that's exactly what Ilia Topuria is. I wouldn't say he's going to win this fight, but I think he's got the best chance out of anybody to do it. And I think in the build-up, this could become massive. Tupuria's star power has shot up in the past year. A lot of people are interested in him now. Islam has a massive fan base, and at the end of the day, it's featherweight versus lightweight. It's two champs, a champ fight. It's obviously going to be massive. These are always massive fights, and in front of you, you have a guy in Ilia Topuria who has that Conor McGregor-like aura, a guy who goes out there, shuts people's lights off, has the flashy suits, has the business ideologies that make it seem like he is on top of everything. He's just a complete stud, and to be honest, I think if he does get in there with Islam, he stands a really good chance at being able to knock him out. I think this is easily the biggest fight the UFC could put on this year. I think it's going to be very tough to make this fight happen because of the way the divisions are laid out right now, but think about it. Santiago Bernabeu in Madrid, the UFC Stadium show, Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title. How does that not sound amazing? This one just needs to happen. And there you guys have it. Those are my thoughts on 5 fights we need to see in 2025. Let me know if you guys agreed with me in the comments down below. And also, let me know what fight would get you the most excited. Thank you all for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And check out some of the other content on the channel. I'll see you all in the next one.